And here we are. I don't know if to call you guys like Don's Angels. I don't know. That's something. I'm not sure. But Cenk, Brian, David, welcome to the program. If the online left had a joint chiefs of staff, I think it would probably be you three. And so with all that's going on, I couldn't think of a better time and a better group of people to talk about all of this, all of these issues, especially coming up to the election. So thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. And thank you for welcoming me into this new streaming world and showing me, helping me out. David, I'm going to start with you, okay? Because I want to open with you because I want to talk about the Arizona Supreme Court recently revived this 160-year-old total ban on abortions there. Arizona Republicans like Carrie Lake are already distancing themselves from it. Do you think, David, that abortion is going to be the issue that sinks the right wing in this election?
It has that potential. I think it's a little early, and we can make grand predictions, but I think it's hard to say that it will be the issue. But this really is potentially a problem. It's all completely predictable. I mean, you go back to the end of 2015, lots of folks, without patting anybody on the back necessarily, were saying the path here is if Trump wins, he gets 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices at the first opportunity. They will overturn Roe v. Wade. Antiquated laws that are still on the books in many states will then all of a sudden be at the forefront. And next thing you know, you have laws. You know, we said 1964, many of us were thinking this is an 1864 law. Next thing you know, those are the laws people have to contend with. And it's leaving the evangelical right furious. Mike Pence putting out this very critical tweet the other day. It's also leaving folks who are in the majority who think abortion should be legal in most cases angry. So it has the potential to be a real problem.
Well, the thing is, as you said, you can't really be half in and half out. I mean, you can't, this sort of leave it up to the states. You can't really be half in and half out when it comes to abortion.
I mean, listen, you can claim to be, but the problem is that there's the majority of the country now actually doesn't really want that. They're in theory open to states' rights until what states want are no longer, unless it's no longer convenient to them. And we're seeing that happen with a lot of folks on the MAGA side. And I think that this has the potential to backfire. Now, there's going to be so many other issues. I know Cenk and Brian will talk about some of them. So I'm not ready to say this is going to be the defining issue in November, but it seems to be important.
And jump in anytime, guys, if you feel passionate about it. But Brian, I want to ask you, do you think that this is going to be a deciding issue or maybe one deciding issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the issue. To David's point, in terms of being able to straddle both sides, I think Donald Trump tried to do that, and it blew up in his face pretty badly because on Monday he came out and said that he supports states' rights, and the veracity of that claim we can get into in a moment because he doesn't. But regardless, he said it. He said he supports states' rights. And then what happened on Tuesday? The very next day, within 24 hours, a state came out and said that we're upholding an abortion ban from 1864. And so by virtue of saying that he supports states' rights, he now owns the issue that happened within 24 hours of him saying that. So there is no way to be able to straddle this issue because when you claim that you want states' rights in an attempt to make yourself seem more moderate, what the states are actually doing completely undermines that, and it does it immediately.
But Cenk, he did say today, he was in Atlanta and he was getting off a plane, either getting off or getting on a plane, and he said to a reporter, I'm going to speak to the governor and we're going to fix that, take care of it immediately.
So look, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, and he's now become a standard greasy politician. Oh, I'm so proud that I overturned Roe v. Wade. And at the same time, I don't mean it. I don't mean it. Yeah, women can have any rights as they want as long as I get elected and I get rich and I get famous and all these things. So which one is it, Donald? You greasy, greasy politician. So he's so, and the Republicans' hypocrisy is obvious as it is every single time. Lindsey Graham all of a sudden saying this is a moral issue that has nothing to do with geography. So let me get this right. When conservatives in this country were defending states' rights, during slavery and Jim Crow for 100 years, that was not a moral issue, or that was a moral issue that was totally fine to be decided by geography. But all of a sudden, we're not talking about states' rights because he wants to make abortion illegal everywhere. Lindsey Graham does. And so Donald Trump, make up your mind. In the case of Arizona, real quick, look, the court decision is what it is. When you overturn Roe v. Wade, things like this happen. Old laws kick into place. I don't have much of an issue with that legally. Policy-wise, it's a disaster for the women of Arizona, And then in terms of politics, Joe Biden has never had a better gift. This puts Arizona back into play.
Right.
Now Biden has a pretty great chance of winning Arizona. Whereas
And for people like Carrie Lake, it's a disaster. For anybody who's on the ticket in Arizona as a Republican, I think it would be a disaster for them. So,
And I would add, not just Arizona either. I mean, this is going to be on the ballot in Montana. This is going to be on the ballot in Florida. This is going to be on the ballot in New York, where these congressional races have major implications for the House in 2024. So, they've really, stepped in it here as badly as they can.
Yeah. Cenk, I want to pivot to something else. Some of the comments that you have made in recent days. You've been incredibly critical of President Joe Biden here. In recent days, you have even gone as far to suggest that you would vote for RFK Jr. instead of Biden. Really?
Yeah, I'm considering it. So I don't know why people get so outraged by this. And I know part of it is that it's a binary world. So when you say you're dissatisfied with Joe Biden, people go, oh, so you love Donald Trump? No, I hate Donald Trump. I don't know that anybody hates Donald Trump more than I do. Having said that, that doesn't mean that Joe Biden doesn't have an awful, immoral, genocide-supporting policy in Gaza. And I'm disgusted by it, and any decent person should be disgusted by it. So what am I supposed to say? Like, oh, Joe Biden's so great. No, I don't do propaganda. Joe Biden sucks, and his corruption is the same as all of the establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans. They take hundreds of millions, actually in the case of Biden, billions of dollars in corporate campaign contributions and pretend that the contributions don't matter to them. So I'm not ever going to grab pom-poms and cheerlead for Joe Biden. Now, in terms of RFK Jr., I'm not saying I'm going to vote for him. I'm saying I have begun to consider it. He's crazy on vaccines and conspiracy theories, etc. At the same time, he doesn't come in with a giant amount of corruption baggage like Biden and Trump do. So that's just reality. And then where does that leave me? I don't know. I'm going to see how the campaign plays out.
You have said that Joe Biden has been, quote, corrupt his whole life. I mean, what evidence do you have that Joe Biden is corrupt?
100% corrupt. I have overwhelming evidence. But I don't want people to think that I'm picking on Joe Biden as he's the only politician who's corrupt or that he's personally corrupt. I'm talking about systemic corruption. The problem with Donald Trump is he's personally corrupt and he can't wait to take money from Saudi Arabia and all these other places. We get that. We all understand that, right? But when it comes to Biden, people in mainstream media and the Democratic Party make what I view to be a totally insane statement, which is, no, he might have taken $1 billion from corporate contributions, but he doesn't owe them any favors. And he doesn't let those donors affect them at all. Look, that's just nuts. So here, I'll give you an example of the thing that I'm most animated about these days, which is Gaza. He's taken $11.2 million from AIPAC. I mean, I'm curious what you guys think, but I think it's mental to think that he doesn't.
Before I move on, I understand that. Listen, I get it that you're upset about Gaza. That is understandable. A lot of people are upset, and a lot of people have questions about policy as it relates to Israel and what's going on with Gaza. But to say that Joe Biden is corrupt, maybe he's taking advantage of a system that's already in play. But again, I'll ask you, what evidence do you have that Joe Biden is corrupt?
Don, look, this is the thing that I'm confused by you guys on. And so Joe Biden here, let's talk about one issue, but it applies to drug companies, oil companies, banks, every kind of corporate contribution. But in the case of Gaza, that's a good example. AIPAC has given him $11.2 million over the course of his career. He's the number one recipient of AIPAC money in United States Senate history. So my proposition, which I would, if you did a poll on it, my guess is 95% of Americans would agree, is that does that $11 million affect Joe Biden's unilateral, unconditional support of Israel throughout his entire career and today? 95% of Americans would agree with me. Of course it affects his decisions. But yet all of mainstream media treats it as like corruption. How dare you? He's an angel who would never be affected by $11 million.
Well, that's not what I'm saying, Cenk. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that.
Could I jump in for a second?
Go ahead, Brian.
Cenk, you're a straight talker. You know RFK is not going to win. He doesn't have a chance to win. But you also know that every vote that's not going to Cenk, you know that RFK is not going to be the next president. I think we can all speak plainly here. You're trafficking in straight denial if you're actually claiming by shaking your head that you think that
you want me to address
RFK
it?
Jr. has a chance. To be the next
Well, I think just to if we're going to ask questions, I would say what are the 5 states he's most likely to have a shot in? Maybe we could start narrow.
Yeah, guys, look, here's the deal. Do I know the third-party candidates have a very, very low chance? Jill Stein, Cornel West, and every other election. Of course,
they have no
of course.
chance.
I'm not
They have no
I'm
chance.
not a person who denies reality in any way, shape, or form. Having said that, this election is kind of like the Ross Perot election, where a third-party candidate actually has a legitimate chance because both of the candidates are
correct.
despised. So if a Mark Cuban or a Jon Stewart were to come in, I think they win the whole damn thing. RFK Jr. is a pretty weak candidate, so he has a much lower chance. But even so, he's polling at 10, sometimes at 20%. So if you think that has no chance, I think you're wrong. Is it a high chance? No, of course not.
I have a couple.
Here's the
Oh,
broader
go ahead, Brian.
here's
Sorry.
the broader question. The broader question I want to ask is like knowing that this is like very likely not going to happen. You have more likelihood of being able to persuade, to push Joe Biden, especially on these issues that you're passionate about, than you would if Donald Trump became president, which would be the likely outcome by throwing support behind someone like RFK. You think Joe Biden is bad on Gaza? What do you think Donald Trump would do to Palestine, to Gaza, if he became the next president?
Hang on, Jake,
And
before
beyond
you
that,
answer.
I mean, and we're all saying this as if like from the luxury of a bunch of guys sitting here while abortion bans are being passed across the country.
Right.
We
Yeah.
just talked about an 1864 abortion ban that was just upheld in Arizona. If Donald Trump becomes the next president, then forget Arizona. We're going to have nationwide abortion ban in California, New York, Vermont. I mean, we have the luxury of not having to worry about that in this conversation right here, but there are women across the country who will lose that luxury by virtue of, imposing purity tests on certain candidates.
That is true. That is true. But hang on, Jake. I want David to jump in because I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, listen, on the RFK math, first of all, I mean, I've been seeing what some of his advisors have been saying. One of them's talking about how his path to victory goes through California. I've looked at the math in California. He'd have to take half of Biden's and 1/3 of Trump's support. I mean, I think that it is a mathematical impossibility. Cenk and I have talked about the math of this before on my show, and we may just disagree about what's likely versus what's probable. On the corruption thing, I actually agree with Cenk that every single person who has been president has both benefited from and accepted the status quo of campaign finance, the way politics is financed, super PACs, all of it. And also because we have a Republican Party that has spent years now wasting millions in taxpayer money looking for supposed criminal bribery that they still have no evidence of. James Comer is privately admitting in fundraising emails, we're not going to impeach the guy, it's just not going to work. I think it's important to be responsible and talk about how Cenk pointing out the corruption of the system is totally different than Joe Biden being guilty of any things they're personally accusing him of. And then lastly, and then I'll go back to this other stuff, I don't want to vote in a way that is, I'm a super simple and pragmatic guy. My vote in New York or Cenk and Brian's votes in California aren't actually going to, quote, matter in the sense that neither of those states will be close. Biden's going to win all of them. I actually think of the 3 options, Biden's the best option, so that's who I'm voting for, rather than calculating message sending or whatever. And on Gaza, if one is concerned about the prioritization of the Palestinian people, RFK would be worse based on everything I've heard him say about the conflict, and Trump would be even worse. So even on that, the best option's Biden.
And Cenk, David is right. When I said that he may be taking advantage of a system that's already in place, he articulated that much better than I did. What people think when you say Joe Biden is corrupt, that he's personally corrupt, right? Not that he's part of a system that you're pointing out the flaws in that system. But I spoke with D.L. Hughley. He said something very similar to what David said, and we'll play the soundbite for you.
I had a dinner with him and told him and the vice president the same thing. And I said, but the problem is I don't live in Gaza. I live in the United States of America. And I'm not going to, as a protest vote, make my children's life harder. I'm not going to give my vote to somebody in a protest, from a protest perspective, that would empower people that only want to make my children's life. I can't think of one group of people who wants to give you guns and abortion to rid you of any diversity, equity, inclusion. It's just a lot of things. Like at one point in America, it was illegal for slaves to learn. Now in many places, it's illegal to learn about slaves. That's a mindset. And so there are a lot of things that bother me, but I think where I see people, where I have a clear kind of line of sight is where I think what'll be best for the future of my grandchildren.
What do you say
Yeah.
to that?
So I have so many things to say here. First, let's start out with we are not deciding who we're voting on today. If you guys have already decided and you say, okay, Joe Biden, we bow to you, we serve you, we will do whatever you want. I'm not in that camp. Okay, so he's got to earn my vote,
Neither
earn
am
my
I.
support, and he has not done that at all. Okay, so that's point one. But yes, on election day, if Kennedy, RFK Jr. is still around 10 points, that means he has 0% chance of winning. It applies to Cornell West, Jill Stein, etc. Then I'm going to make a decision between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and I'm never going to vote for Donald Trump. So there you go. Okay, but at this point, we're not anywhere near there yet, and we've got a third-party candidate that's in double digits. In terms of Joe Biden being able to be pushed, I haven't seen it. So on Israel and Gaza, he can't be pushed at all. No matter what what we do, no matter how many, like there's literally 1 million Palestinians starving to death. There's 33,000 dead already, and Joe Biden is saying no, send them $14 billion more to do more genocide. That's not a little issue. That's a giant, giant moral issue. And I do not want to fund a genocide. So you're not going to move me off that position. But David is right that unfortunately all three candidates are awful on Gaza. They're all despicable.
I had the UN ambassador in the other day, and I questioned her about this genocide language, and she said she does not believe it's a genocide.
That's a lunatic position. I'm sorry, but look, if you know what the definition of genocide is, it is not the same as a Holocaust. So, by the way, Israel, what are you doing? For God's sake, what are you doing? Now you're bragging that it's not a Holocaust. So, Holocaust is when you try to kill everybody in the race. Israel is not doing that. Okay, genocide is when you target based on a race and you kill at the levels that Israel is killing at now. Srebrenica was 6,000 Muslims that were killed by the Serbs, and the UN declared that a genocide. If Srebrenica is a genocide, there is absolutely no question at all that Gaza is a genocide, and it has all of the.
Is that not the goal of Hamas? Is to wipe out
cleansing.
the Jewish state? Is that not the goal of Hamas, to wipe out Israel?
Yeah. All of these are super tired talking points. So yes, but Israel is actually preventing a Palestinian state. For 75 long, brutal years of occupation, Israel has said, oh, theoretically the Palestinians don't want us to have a state, but you don't get a state. How is that fair? That doesn't make any sense at all. The minute they allow Palestine, look, both sides need to recognize the two states. The idea that Hamas has that Israel is not going to exist is also very much a lunatic idea and a dangerous, terrible idea. I do not support that at all. I support protecting civilian lives on both sides. And right now, Israel, we've got to be honest about this. Israel has killed 30 times the number of civilians that Hamas did. So if you think Hamas is an awful organization as I do, then you should be outraged by what Israel has done. Yet I don't see that. When it comes to Israel, no, okay, send them 14 billion more. No, honestly, at this point, the Israeli state is, I don't want to put it on the whole government. There's a lot of great people in Israel, and I hope they turn around and they vote the right way. But this current government and the IDF, as it is currently composed, the leadership, are definitely meet the definition of terrorists. Netanyahu is one of the largest terrorists in the world right now.
Hey, real quick, and I know, Brian, you want to get in. On the issue of moving Biden, I kind of do see evidence that Biden can be moved and influenced. I mean, Biden's taken money from Big Pharma for a long time, and yet he did $35 insulin, inhalers, and on the 10 biggest Medicare drugs, now those companies are being forced to negotiate. On cannabis, quite frankly, I don't think Biden cares at all about decriminalizing or legalizing, and yet he's asked for the rescheduling of cannabis. And on student loan debt, I don't think he cared about student loan debt at all, and yet he's done more student loan debt forgiveness than any other president. So I do think that he actually listens to people around him.
Yeah, and when look at the state of the economy. You mentioned the CHIPS Act and all of that. That does not change. That has no bearing on anything?
Those are two different things. And so it's really important to clarify, Don, as you pointed out accurately earlier. So for example, you're right. I don't want anybody thinking that I think that Joe Biden is personally corrupt like Donald Trump is. I think all the Hunter Biden hearings are nonsense, and they've never had any evidence about that. But systemically, he's among the top 3 most corrupt politicians we've ever had: Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden, because they've taken the most amount of money. And you could put Trump and Hillary Clinton in there as well, and get a top 5. Okay. So now, when you talk about pushing Joe Biden, look, some of it is real, but way too little, like rescheduling. Just make marijuana legal nationally. What's wrong with you? You're losing younger voters. It's such an easy layup. 70% of the country agrees. On some of it, though, it's not just weak. It's actually a trick, like the drug prices. You're telling me I'm supposed to give him credit for negotiating drug prices on 1 to 10 drugs out of tens of thousands of drugs? No, that's a way of distracting you and pretending that he did something while he actually protects 99% of the drug companies and their drugs and who are giant donors of his.
But I think what David was responding to is that he can't be moved, but he seems to be moving on those issues. And sometimes and those issues are incremental. No,
he's not moving on the drug issue. That whole thing is a scam to protect drug companies. So you don't saying out of tens of thousands of drugs you're going to negotiate price on 1. That means you're not doing it. In fact, you've got a cover story. On some things, he has moved a little bit. Student debt's a great example that David puts forward. So these are facts, guys. And on student debt, he's relieved about 10% of the student debt, which is such a classic Obama-Biden corporate Democrat move. 10% is definitely better than 0%. So if I had to vote today, I'm going to vote for 10% rather than 0%.
Okay. All right, Jane. Go ahead. I know you want to get in. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like, I mean, you know how the government works. Like, when are we going to get sweeping? Like, well, who's going to sweep in and get and pass Medicare for all and the Green New Deal tomorrow? We have a 51-49 Senate with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. And yet we've gotten a lot of these things done, things that will have material impacts on people's lives, reasons for people to be able to afford medication that they wouldn't have been able to afford yesterday. Is it everything? Of course not. Is it enough? Of course not. Is it going to take more time? Of course it is. But to downplay the accomplishments that they've made just because it's not everything seems so kind of diluted, and you know how the government works. You know,
and I
we're not
think
going to
in this environment, when you consider who's in the Congress, when you look at the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Matt Gaetzes of the world, and what's happening with the House Speaker, to get done what Joe Biden has gotten done is not. I think it's nothing short of a miracle that he has gotten accomplished what he's gotten accomplished.
You have a great opportunity with your platform. I mean, to reach so many people, to be able to use that platform to continue to push him to the left, as we all should. We should push from 10 to 20. We should push for more student loan debt cancellation. But to claim that that it doesn't count because it wasn't everything, it seems just like
Brian,
not the right way to go about doing this. Use your platform to keep pushing the left.
Again, let's be super clear. I never said nothing, and I clarified this. I'll clarify it now. I clarify it on the show all the time. So, for example, one of the best things that Joe Biden did was he put in a 15% minimum corporate tax. That's a great policy, and I love that policy. And I'm fair and honest about all of these things. So 10%, like I said, on student debt relief is a lot better than what Trump did or would ever do. He goes backwards on all of these issues. So I know that, and I clarify that to the audience all the time. But don't come and tell me that 10% is good enough. Give me a pat on the head and move on. No, I'm not giving him a...
That's not what he's saying. He didn't say that. He didn't say give you a pat on the head. He said you should continue to push him along.
Yeah, no, but guys, how's that working out for us? 1 drugs? So at this rate, we're going to take, 10,000 years or 200,000 years to negotiate drug prices on all drugs. I'm tired. No, this is really important. I'm tired of a Democratic leader that we have to beg to do Democratic things. We constantly are begging and pleading with Democratic leaders to do the things that they promised. How about they stop lying to us and actually goddamn do it? Here, I'll give you a great example. We're not talking about Green New Deal or Medicare for All. Brian, I know those are not realistic in this time, and I want to work towards making them realistic. But when you talk about $15 minimum wage or voting rights, those are super realistic, and they chose not to do them. They chose, public option, chose not to
One at a time, please.
Never
One
let-
at a time,
You
please.
know why
Go-
those didn't
go-
pass. You
go
know that
ahead, Brian.
Kirsten Sinema curtsied and voted it down. I mean, what are you supposed to do
So
other than
easy.
short of taking Kirsten Sinema out there and turning her thumbs down into a thumbs up?
David?
These people are advocating for certain things. We have immovable Democrats, corporate Democrats, that those should be the targets of your ire.
They are.
Because it's the Kirsten Sinemas and the Joe Manchins. And by the way, these systemic blocks against having any type of like reasonable democratic governance or representation in the Senate, in the House. We need to pass a Voting Rights Act so that we're not completely gerrymandered out of power. That's where the issue lies. But we can't do any of that. Not like giving Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are very clearly and plainly the cause of these problems, a pass, and just saying that, oh, it's all of the Democrats, actually redounds to their benefit.
Can you
Those are the
imagine
people who are
if
responsible
they
for
were
it.
the majority? Can you imagine if you had a Republican in the White House? Well, not a Republican, I should say. Can you imagine if you had a Donald Trump in the White House and you have the members of Congress and some of the members of the Senate now? Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to make a point about the drug stuff. I don't think it's good to oversell or undersell this stuff. And while Cenk is clearly right that there are 10,000 drugs out there, the reason that those 10 drugs were selected was on the basis of how many people use them. And so, yes, many of those drugs have a few hundred or a few thousand people that use them. Remember the whole Martin Shkreli thing. Not defending Martin Shkreli, but that the drugs that were in question there are used by very few people. So the selection of the 10 drugs is both a starting point and it's strategic because of the number of people using them. And to say it's 10 out of 10,000 kind of misses the significance of it, in my view.
Yeah. Here's how I feel about this. And I think it's very simple, and I'm sure you've thought about it before. I look at politicians and politics as public transportation. They're never going to get you, they're never going to take you to your house like a chauffeur, right? Or you drive your car in your garage. They're going to take you to the bus stop or the train stop that is nearest to your home. And that's what I'm voting on. Someone who is the closest, who gets me the closest to the policies that I find important. And in this particular era right now, that is the Biden administration. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. But the only side now that's looking out for democracy happens to be Democrats, and the one who's in the White House and the one who has the best chance of winning again is Joe Biden, whether we like it or not, and it's not perfect. And that brings me to the next thing, because currently, Brian, the polling is a dead heat. There was one outlier today. Did you see the Reuters Ipsos poll that came out just a short time ago?
Did it have Biden leading by a couple points?
Biden 41, Trump 37. So on the average of polling, there's a +1. He is a +1 over Trump. That's a pretty big turnaround from just a few weeks ago. How do you think he was able to stop the bleeding?
I think it was a combination of a few things. And by the way, I would caveat this by saying, like, I don't really put a ton of stock in these polls anyway. So this is us having a conversation based on something that I don't really agree with the premise of. But I think a couple of things are helping. One, the economy is doing well. It has been doing well for a long time. The macroeconomic factors of the economy are doing well, and those are lagging indicators. So we'll start to feel those now. The fact that we have a record high stock market, the fact that we have 26 straight months of sub 4% unemployment, the fact that we have 15 plus million jobs that have been added, those are going to start to bear themselves out in the coming months. Even though they've been around for a minute, it's going to take a little bit for people to actually feel it. Of course, there's still a ton of work to be done. Then there's also the fact that, of course, the abortion stuff, and now, almost on a weekly basis, we're having updates on the whole question of abortion. We just had Florida Supreme Court rule that Ron DeSantis' 6-week abortion could take effect within the last 24 hours. We had Arizona's Supreme Court also ruled that their 1864 abortion ban can take into effect. People are seeing that. That's an issue that absolutely energizes the entire population, left to right, and so that's having an impact. And then there's the fact that Republicans keep setting the bar all the way in the basement for Joe Biden. And so, for example, I feel like the switch kind of got flipped after the State of the Union. Republicans keep setting the stage where, all Joe Biden has to do is basically show up and say his name, and he's going to exceed expectations. Like, Republicans keep setting expectations all the way on the floor, and so when Biden shows up and he's able to do a good job like he did at the State of the Union, and even kind of go back and forth with some Republicans who are trying to heckle him, it only makes him look better because now everybody's expectations have been set to nothing.
I'm interested to hear what Cenk has to say about this one.
Yeah, no, on this one I totally agree. And so,
You do? Wow. We have a consensus here.
So,
By the way, I should just note I have a ton of respect and admiration for Cenk. So I nothing is personal. You know that
Of course not. Of course not.
I've known Cenk for a long time. He has been nothing but kind to me, and so I just want to put that out there. I'm glad that we're able to have a dialogue, and him and I agree and disagree on certain things.
That's how it's supposed to be. That's how that's what a democracy is built on, right? Differing opinions and ideas and views. Well, Cenk, let me ask you this then, because there's been some serious demographic shifts in the polling when you look at what's for this election. NPR came out with an analysis of their polling from 2020 compared to their most recent poll. Biden is gaining ground with college-educated white people and people over 45, but there is an issue. Right? There's an issue when it comes to younger people. He is losing major ground with young people and non-white voters. Why the shift?
yeah, I'm going to explain that in a second, but I got to tell you that I think this polling is surprisingly great news for Joe Biden. And I'll tell you why. Because I have been seeing him losing younger voters in drip, drip, drip for the last year or so. And especially with Gaza, I've never seen someone lose voters that quickly and that massively. And so he went from plus 26 to now down to on young voters, and he's losing minority voters in a big way, and that was already clear. That's why I ran against him, because I thought he had almost no chance of winning. So where's the good news? Well, now in the polling, you're seeing why the election is still close. When if a Democrat is losing young voters and now is almost tied with Latinos or losing Latinos, he should have absolutely no chance of winning. But what's happened is, number one, college-educated voters are now going in droves to the Democrats and Biden. So there's been a massive shift there. They were already on the Democratic side, but they're much more so now. So from a small margin of victory there, he's gone to a very large margin. And older voters have done something stunning. Older voters are the ones that are the hardest to turn. Their ideas are usually set, their parties are usually set, and it's nearly impossible to move them. But they have moved in very large numbers towards Biden and the Democrats, thereby erasing the advantage that Trump has with younger voters, which is a sentence that should never be spoken, but here we are. And so all of a sudden, and older voters vote more than younger voters do. So Biden is back in a ball game in a way that I have to be honest, I didn't expect.
So a couple things on this, Don, if I can, real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of these numbers don't really pass the sniff test unless you believe that we're seeing the greatest
That was my
racial.
question to you,
unless
David.
you believe
I
we're
was gonna
seeing a
ask if you
racial
believe it.
realignment like we haven't seen since the civil rights era or the Civil War, right? So I recently interviewed Adrian Shropshire, who runs Black Pack. They have done a bunch of their own polls. They are not able to replicate any of these racial realignment findings. So number one, I would be a little bit skeptical of the degree to which this is being claimed. The other element to this is just like a technical element, and not to get too in the weeds, but we all are familiar with the margin of error. On the polls at the top line, it's often 3 or 4 points. Because of how these crosstabs are created, which are what if we look at men and women? What if we look at men and women broken down by race and then by education? Every time you add another layer, the margin of error goes up. The math is sort of beyond me, but I've spoken to some stats people who attempted to explain it to me. And so I also think that the effect is, number one, not nearly as large as some are claiming, and significantly subject to a growing margin of error the more we want to slice and dice it. I'd be shocked if these are the numbers we get in November.
Well, my question to you is going to be, do you believe those numbers, or if you believe those numbers, David, and you answered that, but if you believe those numbers, why do you think Trump has been able to make such major gains with non-white voters, at least according to the polling? If you believe
I believe the numbers, so I can take this.
Can you let
Yeah,
David?
go ahead, Jeff. No, listen, it would be mere speculation. I'm actually not sure. I think first we have to disaggregate how much of this is erroneous or not completely precise polling data, but I want to hear from Cenk on this.
Yeah. So guys, I don't think that it's that Trump is gaining younger voters or minority voters. I think that Biden and the Democratic Party is losing them. And my theory on why that's happening is because of the TV online divide. Generally speaking, older voters watch television. And if you do that, you're going to get, in my opinion, a corporate message. And a corporate message is status quo is wonderful and terrific. And that might be why Biden is gaining with older voters, because Biden is very much a status quo candidate. But for younger voters, they're getting their information online. And in online, you see the reality. You don't get it glossed over by television. You don't get Morning Joe's filter on it. Morning Joe's filter on it tells you that, well, Israel's 50-50. Well, mainly, no, it's not even 50-50. Israel is like 90% right, blah, blah, blah. But online, you don't see that at all. You see dead babies. You see people being picked out of the rubble. So young people have no interest in Biden's position on Gaza. And you see in the polling, that is the number one issue that has moved younger voters. For minority voters, it's a little bit different. But what's wearing thin is the Democrats constantly saying, you have to vote for us. We're entitled to your vote, and if you don't vote for us, you're a bad person. That is terrible political strategy, and I think
Cenk, Republicans say that as well.
Younger minorities are getting tired of it.
Republicans say the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump has said the same thing to Jewish people.
No. Yeah, that's right. But remember, I'm not a binary guy. I think Trump saying that to Jewish voters is outrageous and ridiculous. So that, to me, it's not an either or. I think they're both doing it. I mean, Trump did it with Jewish voters, and then Biden did it with black voters. If you don't vote for me, you're not black. Are you kidding me? What kind of a obnoxious, entitled message is that?
You'll have to ask him. Okay, I want to move on now. I want to talk about this. This is, for me, this is a big issue and I think it's going to be for all of you, because I believe that if this happens, it's going to be the end of democracy. And this is that Project 2025. I'm sure all of you know about it. What happens if Trump does win? This is a proposed policy platform for a second Trump White House. Some really scary stuff in there. Abolishing the FBI, abolishing the Department of Homeland Security, abolishing pornography, banning abortion pills. I want to know, Brian, what you think of these policy proposals, but more so than that, if this happens, that is really the end of democracy, no?
Yeah, I mean, there's really no way to sugarcoat this. Everything that Trump is kind of saying that he wants to do is nothing more than this like Christo-fascist fever dream, right? Nothing. It's all just straight autocracy, authoritarianism, and he's promising it. And you know what? The fact is, the sad part about it is, a number of people in the Republican base want it, and they've polled them on that exact question. And they asked them, do you want Donald Trump to be able to terminate the Constitution? Do you want him to not have to run again for re-election and just become a dictator? And they've all said yes, or a good number of them have said yes, I should clarify. So yeah, I mean, they're not hiding this, they're not couching it in certain language. They're coming right out and saying exactly what they're gonna do. And I think that, we have to be, I think they're relying too on the fact that so much of it's the Steve Bannon approach of just flooding the zone with shit, right? And just hoping that we don't recognize it. And so I would just say, for us, the pro-democracy forces that span the entire political spectrum from left to right, to not get lost and try to chase each thing and just kind of, what is it that Mehdi Hassan says about Gish Gallop, and just to focus on our winning messages. And I think that's going to be focusing on abortion, and that's going to be the most effective message moving forward.
Gish Gallop is a David Pakman saying as well. But I do have to say, having covered every single word and every single minute of the previous Trump administration when he was in office, he does what he says he's going to do, David. And
he at least tries.
Proposing Project 2025.
I mean,
he's
listen,
going to try to do it.
I try not to be hyperbolic with my audience and say, listen, there's no question that Trump wants to do these things to the extent that he understands them, to the extent that someone told him, the Heritage Foundation or whoever said, hey, here's something you should do. I believe he's going to try. I am cautiously optimistic that he would not succeed at doing all of these things. One of the scariest parts of Project 2025 is he wants to replace career bureaucrats, people who work at the lower levels in so many federal government departments, who are privately, they vote, I'm sure, but they are overtly non-political in their role. They're not replaced with every new administration. He wants to take tens of thousands of those folks and replace them with complete and total loyalists who also happen to be incompetent in many ways. That's extraordinarily scary. I'm cautiously optimistic he would not actually succeed at that. And so when my audience calls and says, do I think if Trump wins, there will be an election in 2028? I do. I think there's going to be a lot of problems, a lot of strife, a lot of close calls, and he is going to have some successes if he wins. But I do actually think that our checks and balances this is a low bar, but are strong enough that we will have an election in 2028. Cenk, you don't think so?
Cenk,
I disagree.
I'm
Sorry, if I can just jump in. I don't respectfully, David. I disagree. I think, I host a series with Mark Elias, who's the nation's premier voting rights attorney, What Republicans are doing at a granular level is trying to disassemble the very foundation of democracy. In Arizona, there's efforts to tear up the voter manual. Like, it's basically, you would liken it to not just changing a stop sign to a street light, right? Like to a red light. It's basically taking all of the signs off of every street and expecting people to know what to do. And then when chaos would ensue, it would give them a predicate to come in and just kind of upend the entire system and do with it what they will. So there are lawsuits across the country. There's election vigilantism efforts across the country. There are, just efforts to disassemble every facet of our democracy happening in the courts right now as we speak. And if they had the presidency, and God forbid 1 or 2 houses in Congress, they would have a ton of success at being able to succeed with this kind of stuff.
And Cenk, on top of that, the Washington Post is reporting that one policy under consideration is the Insurrection Act. Trump using the Insurrection Act of 1807 to activate the military for domestic law enforcement, as well as directing the DOJ to target Trump adversaries.
Yeah, I think that I'm definitely the most alarmist out of all of us on this. So number one, look, if somebody said to me, we're going to go for systemic change and we're going to make the executive branch a little bit stronger to make sure we could root out corruption, I would be very open to that. But this Project 2025 is nothing like that. It's the exact opposite. What it does is it doesn't dismantle the corruption, it furthers the corruption. So one of the things that it does, for example, is they want to get rid of all regulations so that oil companies can run roughshod with almost no laws to check them. What kind of populism is this? That's not populism. This is a backdoor way of actually cementing corporate rule. So it's not an accident that the Heritage Foundation, totally powered and fueled by corporate money, is pushing this agenda. But the most dangerous parts of it are the ones that you guys have mentioned. And I'm much more alarmist than David on this for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Insurrection Act is real. They consider that many times in the first administrations, including a 3-hour conversation at the White House on whether they should roll out the tanks and do martial law after he lost the election. These are very dangerous people. And the only reason that Donald Trump didn't do that is, to be fair to the rest of his staff, at that point, when he still had establishment figures in his administration, they said, we are all going to resign, together, unanimously, if you do that. He's not going to have those guys as a check this time. There's going to be no brakes in the car. So it's going to be a bunch of loons in the room, and they're not going to hesitate to do things like martial law. Guys, they already did a fake elector plot. That is a coup against America, where they knew they lost the election and they tried to overturn a legitimate election, full well knowing they lost. And part of the reason they went in that direction is because some portions of the right wing have become convinced, ironically, right before the numbers began to change, that they had lost demographically and they were never going to recover. So the right wing has never cared about democracy. What they care about is power. So if they get power through a democracy, they're fine with it. If they need to destroy democracy to get power, they're also fine with it. Not all of the right wing, but yes, the Trump portion of the right wing. Project 2025 has so many things in it, like getting rid of the FBI. That's defund the police on steroids. That's a lunatic position to get rid of the FBI and Homeland Security.
But do you agree that do you agree that he would not actually be able to get rid of the FBI?
Yeah, he would have trouble with the FBI, David, but I think that you're overestimating the opposition he's going to get. I saw the first time around, and I thought that Trump was going to get run out of town, and I famously lost a bet with my co-host Anna Kasparian about that. And what I made the same mistake that I think you're doing right now, which is thinking that the Democrats are going to be effective in fighting back, that the establishment or the system is going to be effective in fighting back. Last time around, they were awful at fighting back, and Trump ran a steamroller over them. This time, it's going to be much worse.
Cenk
I
and David,
agree.
hang on, Brian. Cenk and David, I think that I agree with Cenk on this, David. I think that maybe you're overestimating the checks and balances in the system, because last time Donald Trump was in office, they were tested and many of them failed.
Some of them did fail. Some of them, yeah. I mean, listen, Cenk is doing a really good job of convincing me that it's extra dangerous to mess around with any Bobby Kennedy Jr. stuff this time around. You're with every word you're convincing me it's that dangerous.
That's a good one. Go ahead,
By the way, I
Brian.
prefer Cornell.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think to Cenk's exact point, we have Democrats and Republicans playing two different games, and for a long time to right now, I mean, we have the Dick Durbins of the party who are so focused on like ceremony and decorum, and like they're just getting stabbed in the face with with a machete on the other side, and that may have barely held up thanks to, in part, even a few Republicans. Those Republicans will be gone. There won't be any Mike Pences. There won't be any, insofar as Ty Cobb was able to do anything, or some of these White House counsel. Those guys will be gone. And so what they did in 2020 was basically a stress test. They're pulling on the parts of the fence to see where the
Testing the
weak
limits
parts
of
are.
the system.
And I can promise you that fence is coming down in 2024 to 2028 if Donald Trump wins re-election, because the Democrats aren't going to be able to do it, and there will be zero Republicans. There won't be any Brad Raffenspergers or Mike Pences or Ty Cobbs that are going to be blocking him.
All right, I want to go. We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to do something, to some things quickly. And I know that now on streaming, I can go a lot longer, but we have gone on for a while. So if we can do these quickly, I want to talk about fundraising. Donald Trump. $50 million we saw these big money donors sitting on the sideline, but he got $50 million, at least if it's real, if those numbers are real, David, this past weekend at Mar-a-Lago or in Palm Beach. Why do you think that these big money donors are now coming up and coughing up money and not staying on the sidelines?
Well, it's at this point clear that Trump's their only option. There was a point in time I was talking to some Romney-like Nikki Haley supporters who were saying, while it's possible maybe it's someone else, we're going to get behind Haley. But there's folks who are now realizing it's either Trump or Biden. They may even see another Biden term as maybe pushing up that top marginal tax rate a couple of points. It's going to hit their checkbook. I think that's one element of it. What's really funny about the fundraising thing is after Biden raised $25 million from 5,000 people, that was evidence of Biden's corruption, and he's got all of the elite friends and so on and so forth. All of a sudden, Trump raises $50 million from 100 people, and this is a sign that the grassroots is behind him and the will of the people, and he's putting together a policy package that they love. This is another example of the principles don't matter. It's just what can I say to justify you voting for me?
Cenk, I mean, another example of how corrupt Joe Biden is, right?
Yeah, so I totally agree with David. So I'm worried about the 26 million or so that Biden raised, but then I'm doubly worried about 50 million if that number is true. Look, the number isn't true. He just wanted to say that he doubled Biden, but that's not important. It's a giant number either way. So look, the reason billionaires like Woody Johnson, who were at the Mar-a-Lago event, said that Trump is, quote, extremely compassionate is because he is extremely compassionate to the most corrupt billionaires in this country. So with Trump, they get nirvana, they get the systemic corruption, and he throws in the personal corruption for free. So Sheldon Adelson's a terrific example of this. So in 2016 and in 2020, he gave Donald Trump's PACs over $100 million. By the way, it is political malpractice on the part of Joe Biden and the Democrats not to talk about that nonstop. $100 million from one person. And Trump right now is trying to get the same from his widow, Miriam Adelson. And he gave everything he wanted, including a get out of jail free card for Sheldon Adelson and a Presidential Medal of Freedom to his wife. So thrown in as a tchotchke. So they get personal and systemic corruption. These billionaires are ecstatic with Donald Trump.
Yeah. Cenk, aren't you an attorney?
Yes.
You an attorney? Yes. Okay. So in these, I was speaking to someone today, and I've been watching folks saying they think that Donald Trump is going to be convicted in the hush money case. Do you agree?
Yeah,
with that?
absolutely. People said that was a weak case. I don't know why they said that. I guess because in my opinion, people are like too focused on the fact that Stormy Daniels is an adult film star, right? The thing that you focus on is this an actual crime? There's no question it's a crime, partly because his co-conspirator, Michael Cohen, already went to prison for it. It's not really in dispute. This is a rock solid case. Other people like Dinesh D'Souza have gone to jail for same exact crime. So I thought this case should have been brought a long time ago. As soon as he got out of office, because Michael Cohen went to prison for it, he doesn't get any more solid than this. So the real question to me is what happens after he gets convicted. It's possible that he is, look, anything could happen at any time. Any judge, any juror can be MAGA or overly careful, or 1,000 things could happen. But as a matter of percentages, he is very likely to get convicted here. And if he does, I have no idea what happens.
It seems like in the New York case, he's run out of postponements because the jury selection starts next week in this trial.
Start on Monday,
On
yeah.
Monday,
And he's attempted at least 3 times to delay. I think 3 days in a row, the appeals court has swatted down his efforts to delay and his other dilatory tactics that he's put forward. So he can come forward within the next few days and try to fire his attorneys, for example, and say, look, I just fired my attorneys. We had irreconcilable differences. Now I need to get new attorneys, and it's going to take me 6 months to bring them up to speed. Judge Merchan would have the opportunity to just say no, to deny that, and say that you have to represent him anyway, which is likely to happen because it's clear now that Donald Trump will just try whatever he can to delay. But he will spend the next few days now still trying to make sure that he doesn't stand trial, that the jury doesn't start to get seated in the next 5 days.
Do we all agree that there's no way Trump actually does prison time, and if at the end of the rainbow there is a sentence, it's going to be served in home confinement?
Yeah, I'd said that. I don't think we're going to see him in an orange jumpsuit or serving.
I don't think for this case either, but I think in any of the other cases, I think for the D.C. prosecution, the classified documents case down in Florida, or the RICO case in Fulton County, I think that that prison time would absolutely be on the table.
I don't think it would be on the table, but I don't think they're going to send a former president to prison. I have a hard time believing it. David, is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm saying.
And he knows too much. He can be compromised at any point. But if it does happen, right, if he is convicted, he'll be home confined.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the reason, Cenk, if you want quickly.
Yeah, so MAGA are the world's most ironic populace because they think that he should be above the law because he's one of the elites and was a former president. That's nonsense. He should follow the law like the rest of us.
So since I am no longer in mainstream media anymore, I have to say that my media diet has changed. I find myself watching you guys a lot more than I watch broadcast or cable news, and getting election information, and I think I'm much more informed. So let me just say this, and I'll start with you, David, because you were invited to an event at the White House in March, the White House hosted a number of different online creators. Tell me about what you discussed at this event, and you think they realize now the influence of streaming and online media.
Yeah, they clearly realize it, and I think there's now 3 different teams. I think there's a White House team, a Biden team, and a Harris team that are specifically geared towards online content creators. I think it's great. I'll be honest, I showed up at the event assuming we were going to be given a list of talking points and kind of given a pat on the butt and sent back home to repeat the talking points, but it was basically just an open discussion where we could bring any issue to the table with the vice president. It was off the record, but generally speaking, I can tell you half or 60% of the questions were adversarial in nature, at least starting from the premise of, I don't agree with what's being done, or are you aware of this problem? Do you know about this issue? So I think it's a good thing. I think it makes sense on the basis of audience size. The shows like ours in a day on YouTube can do as well as some of the middle of the road or better performing full hours of cable news in some cases. So I think from a mathematical perspective, it makes sense. And I'm hoping that there's just more of it. People said, would I go if it was Trump's digital content team who invited me? And the answer is absolutely I would. I would still show up there and I would listen to what they have to say. I would ask my questions and it would be an informative experience.
Hey, Brian, the Biden administration is utilizing what Axios describes as a, quote, army of influencers as part of the media wing of their re-election campaign. What do you make of this move from the Biden campaign for the future of political journalism? Because now I think they're going to start inviting more online and streaming journalists into the briefing room and to the traveling press.
Well, I think it shows that they understand where the people are, where people get their information now. Fewer and fewer people are watching mainstream media sources. More and more are coming online. YouTube, there was an article that just came out today that shows that YouTube far and away is the most powerful source of information, far and away has the most viewers, from everything from music to political coverage and everything in between. So there's that. That I think redounds to our benefit. And also, I think that the mainstream media this is a testament to the fact that they've dropped the ball, and they had these last 8 years to show that they were up to the task of kind of defending democracy. At every turn, continuing to today, they've shown that they can't do it. I mean, we see these both sides headlines that go to today, and like people are smart enough to recognize that ain't it, and they don't want to have to be forced to consume only that certain kind of content that is infuriating at best. And so this is hopefully a way to kind of push the country into a more common sense approach to this, and a more honest approach to what we're hearing right now.
Cenk, I'm going to give you the final word on this because I think you're the most critical of what you call the mainstream, or what you call corporate media. So but you're all huge staples in progressive media, and I'm curious just how your view, Cenk, on the role in the upcoming election and politics writ large of streaming and online media.
Yeah, so I gave a speech about a decade ago to Democratic consultants in DC. And the next day somebody came by about digital media and the power of digital media and how they were missing out on it. And because I was emceeing an event, I listened to them all day long, and they were talking about, oh no, we're really forward looking. If we have 1% or 5% of our budget left, we throw it to digital media. And I'm like, oh guys, you're gonna get routed, right? And I got a visit the next day saying you're banned. They're not gonna let you speak to those guys anymore. And so now, 10 years later, they're beginning to wake up. Oh, okay, mainstream media isn't controlling people the way that they used to. So now we have to find a new way to control people. But with online media, they're in for a rude awakening. So in the beginning, they're getting, their outreach is smart, logical, I get it. And they're getting principled guys like Brian and David to do either go talk to them or do interviews. Brian did a really interesting interview with Joe Biden before. I don't mind the influencers working with them, etc. But it's very important for both sides to understand. For the influencers, do not trade access for support. Trade access for honesty. You've got to be honest, and you've got to be. And for the Biden team, the Democrats, etc., they're not going to be able to control all of the influencers. Even if they control one or two, in the old days, you control CNN, MSNBC, you got a headlock on the great majority of the American people, unfortunately. These days, even if you controlled a couple of influencers, they would then lose support, and new influencers would pop up. It would be whack-a-mole. The correct strategy is listen to the influencers so that you have a better strategy going forward in getting younger voters, and honestly, at this point, all voters.
Well, I do have to say that same talk that lecture that you are giving to the administration and to politicians, right? I think it needs to be given to advertisers as well.
Yes.
Because advertisers are very hesitant, as you guys know, about advertising around news and especially politics, and they are risk averse in anything that is, controversial. And I think that needs to change. I think that needs to change.
We see it in Facebook, for example, where Facebook says, okay, there's so much far right election denialism, we're just going to limit all political content. And then it screws people like all of us who don't traffic in election denialism and anti-democratic behavior. But now we don't have the same ability to reach all of our followers, all of our subscribers on different platforms because, it's been painted with a broad brush thanks to the actions of certain people who want nothing more than to undermine the entire system, these bad actors.
Yeah.
Has an asymmetrical effect.
Yeah. Real quick, last thing on that is that, look, I gave another speech about a decade ago at CES to advertisers and told them your brand safety standards are insane. And to this day, they still have the same standards. So, for example, I can give dozens of examples, but the last one here is, if you say racist things, it gets blocked the same exact way as if you say anti-racist things to fight against racism, sexism, or anything along those lines. Advertisers look at it and go, I don't know who's right or wrong. I don't know if gay people and black people are inferior or not. I'm just going to get it out of the whole field, and I'm going to punish all of you, whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. And that is a terrible strategy.
I think it's harmful for not doing it because then you limit the possibility, right? You limit the possibility of an informed electorate. And I think that you guys have been doing it for a while. I'm just starting out. We do a good job at informing an electorate, and I think it's just awful that advertisers are maybe averse to us.
If I could say one thing, I would just say that I hope I can speak for David and Cenk here and say that we're glad that we have you as part of this ecosystem. I mean, my whole thing from day one has always been to grow the left of center ecosystem. I don't know, I know that you don't consider yourself left, but I think, in this struggle between what we see now as anti-democracy and pro-democracy, I think I can safely say that, Don, you are on the correct side of this. And so glad that you're part of this ecosystem. I think that as we can build it more and more, that's only going to help. You know, Cenk and David, you guys are the reason that I'm doing this. I watched you guys before I had a channel at all.
And I watched Cenk, so Cenk's really the start of it all. Yeah.
And you guys never watched me on CNN, so that's great. Thank you.
But thank you guys.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Cenk, I'm sorry we beat up on you so much, but you know.
I'm pretty sure I can handle
it. David, thank you. Brian, I appreciate it, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll see you next time on The Don Lemon Show. Thanks for watching The Don Lemon Show. Make sure you click on the image in the top right to subscribe to my channel and the thumbnail in the bottom right to watch more content from my show. And I'll see you next time.